Good morning. Happy Chav Sivan, 83rd anniversary of when the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin arrived to America, which also corresponds to July 4th, Independence Day. And we will continue now reviewing Hemshech Ayin Beis, the end, conclusion, informed by what we learned in the Maimorim of the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, in the last few months. Mika Hashem Elokeinu HaMagbiel L'Sheves HaMashpil L'Diros B'Shamayim U'Ba'aretz. So, based on, which is the source text and material and foundational material of a big part of the end of Hemshech Ayin Beis. So based on that and based on what we've learned and combining some other source materials, we're trying to piece together the climax, if you wish, of Hemshech Ayin Beis, because the Rebbe Rashab never finished writing it, to understand the ongoing flow, and especially answering the questions and finishing the themes that the Rebbe Rashab opened up in these last section that we're talking about. So it's not a small section. We're talking about close to 200 pages, the last 170 pages of the Hemshech, which is what we're really reviewing in all this context that I just mentioned. So where are we at? We began, just put things into context, we began right after speaking about the interface, Mamata L'Mayla, through Tefillah primarily, where we connect the divine and existence from the bottom up. So on page 1350 in Ayin Beis, now, if the Rebbe Rashab is giving equal time to both the bottom up and top down, the bottom up was 550 pages. In the top down, we only have around 170 pages. So I'm not suggesting he would have written 550 pages. We don't know, but it's possible. He may have or may have not. But he definitely written close to 200 pages on Mamayel Lamata, and clearly did not come to finishing it, because many of the ideas he never got back to. So that's what we're doing right now, is reviewing the process and this whole flow, the narrative, and in the process, we'll be able to then piece together this puzzle, try to understand as much as possible, based on all the materials I just mentioned, what exactly would have been the ideas. So, essentially, God is giving us a snapshot of His intentions, of His plan, of His wisdom, of His will, which is all what Torah personifies. That's Torah. There's our work that we do with our efforts. Obviously, we also learn Torah, and Torah also has elements, therefore, of Mamat L'Mayla, just as Tefillah has elements of Mamay L'Mata. But overall, it's two different approaches, and we're now into the approach of Torah. But to do so, the Rebbe Rashab first began by introducing the Maimon Mika Hashem Elokeinu, the themes of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, Ner Mitzvah V'Torah. What is the two different forms of Ner? The difference between the Ner of a Mitzvah and the Ner of a Neshama. The difference between Torah, and how Neshama is connected to giving us also, like he said, the Mara Adam, the likeness of the divine in the Neshama. There's the likeness of the divine in Torah. So we see a Neshama also gives us a picture. It's created b'Tselem Elokim. Our soul is also a somat of a snapshot of God, not just Torah. So what's the distinction between the two? All this is laying the groundwork of what the Rebbe Rashab then goes on to explain Nira L'Levayra Inyan with Eir Hariyah. But it's about Eir Hariyah. He's going to use vision, eyesight, as the operative example, more than an example. The very concept of sight and vision to understand this whole process of interfacing in general, but specifically Mamay L'Mato. And as a result, we go also into Mamat L'Mayla discussion. What is Eir? So there's Eir Mashpiyah. Just 1 second, please. 1 second, please. Okay. So Mamai Lamata is Er Mashpia, like Er Hashemesh, the sunlight. Mamat Lamai is Er Makabel, and the three levels of Er Makabel, the moon, luminous stone, and Er Hariya. And we learned the difference between those. Again, summing up what we've reviewed so far. And I'm now looking at page 1352 and 1353, where he goes into Er Hariya, which has its own paradox. On one hand, it is stronger than the moon and the luminous stone because it itself sees. It's a seeing entity. On the other hand, it doesn't have any light of its own, shining light. It needs an external light for it to be able to see, as we discussed on page 1353 and 1354. And then in 1355, the Rebbe Rashab, goes back. What's the moral of all this? Zoh and Malchus. Zoh and Malchus is essentially Er Mashpia and Er Makabel. Because Malchus, as he says, Be'etzem Husa is Mashpia, and Malchus Be'etzem Husa is Makabel. And we discussed that also in detail on page 1355. That took us to 1356. And let's see here. Yeah. And again, the emphasis Makabel here is not just a passive entity that just receives. It itself is a force. It's an oir. It's an oir Makabel. It's just the way it functions is different. For it to shine, it requires to receive from something, but it does shine. And the different levels, we'll discuss more in detail as we go along. Then he spoke about some of the difference between Mashpia and Makabel. One difference is that one is a Gilui and one is a Helam, like Oir and Keli. Another difference is the Mashpia is Atzmi V'Tivi. It is fundamentally at its core, and it's natural for it to be Mashpia, whereas Makabel has to work on being a Makabel. It's to be prepared, primed, trained, different aspects of that, as he discussed on bottom of page 1356. And the third difference is V'Oid, Mashpia Ma'atzmi, Mashpia, the Mashpia is from within, means Atzmi. Doesn't require something else. It itself is Mashpia, and the Ashpah comes from within itself. By a Makabel, it's not Mashpia its own light, it's Mashpia the light it receives, and with the power of the Mashpia, it's able to be, the power of the Mashpia, the Makabel is able to Mashpia as well. As he explained on page 1357. Then, to explain this further, he went deeper into Malchus. What is this Er Makabel? What is this real personality like? And what we learned is that is the Zohar, that the Zohar says that Malchus, like the moon, les klum, has no light of its own, has nothing of its own. And there's two interpretations what that means. One is it doesn't have any light of its own. It comes from Zah, like the moon does not have light without coming from the sun. And the second interpretation is that it doesn't have anything of its own without Avodah Mamata, without the Avodah Malachim and Neshamas. In other words, Malchus on its own needs to be filled up through our work. And I'm reading now on page 13, I'm summing up what we learned on page 1357. But then he said that therefore tells you that Malchus, even though it does not have revealed light of its own, but it has the etzem in it, because the kavana is dafke Malchus. The kavana is not mashpia. The kavana is to go down in a world, in existence, where there is concealment, and there reveal. So Malchus actually contains and fulfills what he called at the bottom of the page. Seif ma'aseh machshava tchila, sheresh hamach b'chinas atzmus ein sof. Ubashara shashed helama atzmi. Reading now on page 1358. The Malchus is mushreshes ba'atzmus. And that's why Malchus emanates very differently than Zoh. And here he explained the difference that we learned. The differences that says in where he brought it from Move Sha'arim, I think. Yeah. The difference between how they are emanated from God, how they were so-called shaped and created. So you have like this. A Zoh, Netzal B'Seit Shesh B'Chinas Vav K'tzav. Zoh was created with a structure of 6 facets, the 6 emotions. Malchus and the Tesvis meaning an addendum to it, so to speak, or an additional aspect, is the Gimel Rishenis. Malchus was Netzala b'Sherish Nekudah, only a Nekudah, a spark, a dot. So there's nothing revealed, there's no facets, there's no structure. But the Teisvis, it has the 9 spheres that you can build it up. And that's what you have to do with Malchus, as he explains there. So that's the Aveda that we do. When we do Aveda, we're building up Malchus. And both interpretations are emes. Both interpretation that Malchus receives from the Eir before it, meaning from Zah, and Malchus receives from the Aveda below, as shall be explained as he continues going. So now we stopped in the middle of page 1358. Let me just find the exact place where we stopped. Bottom line is, at the top of the page, he spoke about Malchus Netzola B'Bchinas Nekudah. Nekudah is Helem. That Helem Atzmi of Atzmus, it's all concealed. However, and that's in the state of Shcherehi. It's darkened. Avol Shcherehi V'Ivanova, but it's beautiful because Yechele Nekudah Zu Lamed Panim B'Panim. Because though the Nekudah right now is a dot, think of the moon. The moon as a new moon, you don't see anything. But that doesn't mean that does not mean the moon does not have the capacity to shine. It means at this point it's in that place. Now we need to do something to make it shine. And that's the whole kavanah. God did not need to create existence to shine. He shines, he doesn't need to shine. What does he have to prove? The whole kavanah is to go into a reality that on its own is concealed. To the point he doesn't mention here, Tachtenim, but ultimately to the darkest of worlds, which is our world, and that should become something that begins to shine and become a home for God, which is through our Aveda. And we'll also learn through Malchus receiving from above, but that's in the process of creation. In the process of Aveda, it's we that do the work, and that's why Makabel is so vital. We talked before about Mamat L'mayla, Mamayla Mat. You could say, what do we need Mamat L'mayla for altogether? God creates a world, sends us Torah, L'mayla Lamata, gives us a gift, and it shines. But that's not the kavanah. The kavanah is that it should be from us. It should be our initiative. That's the whole point. It should be that we recognize it, that we internalize it, we integrate it. So that doesn't mean we are not given koiches and resources from the top down. But the point is that it should be primarily from the bottom up. The truth is a combination of both and the best of both worlds, as we will continue to discuss throughout. I'm just demonstrating how all this is part of this larger theme that is the central theme of Ayin Beis. Okay, so if it could go panim b'panim, and I think we learned further. He said, let's see how far we went here. Approximately around 10 lines into the top of page 1358, where we stopped in the last class we had. So I'll sum it up as we continue learning, but I wanted to just stop for a moment if anybody wants me to clarify anything, since I gave a general overview. Maybe there's something you want to clarify. As I said, all these themes are going to be discussed a lot more. By no means exhausted, just wanted to get everything up to speed so we can then continue learning. And again, we're learning now differently than the first time we learned this, that we're not going through every detail and every line. That you can do if you want. You can go back to earlier recordings of previous classes a few months ago when I did that, or more than a few months ago. We established 22 months ago, to be exact, almost 2 years ago. Here the focus is on the opposite, is to take what we've learned and now contextualize it in the biggest, larger theme of things, now that we know, firstly, what we've learned here, and also what we know from the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe's Maimer, and other Maimarim that we refer to try to understand the whole flow. Also, I'm going to be focusing a lot more on the bigger picture as it informs what we're learning here in these final pages. Again, I say final. I know it sounds very few pages, but it's not. It's we're talking here close to 170 pages that we're reviewing now. We're on page now 1358. The Hemshech concludes 1477. So we have another good 120 pages to review. And I will be going, as I said, select sections, but above all, connecting it all to the central themes, especially as we get to the closer to the close, where we'll go back to trying to answer all the questions that were not answered and the ideas that were not completed. So that's the trajectory there where we're headed. But let me say, as I said, I'd stop here if anybody wants me to clarify any points, by all means. Okay. Good. So back to page 1358. It's a little Kabbalistic language. I'm simplifying it by just keeping it focused on what it means practically, in the sense that when we talk about Malchus and we talk about Nekudah and Ponim B'Ponim, that's Kabbalistic language. What it means in simple English is that we begin with nothing. When I say nothing, I don't mean nothing in the what do we call it, pedestrian sense of it. I mean nothing revealed, like a child. Even though we have resources and faculties and intelligence and a mind and a heart and all that, but a child has to be taught. We start from scratch, Aleph Beis. So yes, in the soul, there are many, as I said, resources. And all of us are taught the entire Torah in our mother's womb. However, the process is one, Mamata Lamaila, very step-by-step process. And just think of a child. I think it's the best example. That to me is the epitome of Malchus. It's Malchus, less l'magam al klum. That doesn't mean Malchus will not grow. Of course it will grow, like an ultimate makabel. As the child develops, the child is able to begin to give off as well. And this child can turn into becoming the greatest person on earth, the Rebbe himself, Moshe Rabbeinu. But he began as a child, as a makabel. So essentially that is a microcosm, the whole Aveda. We come into a world, all of us, a dark world, and less than magam klum. However, like he says, ultimately, this nekudah can stand face to face with its mashpia, like a sun and a moon, literally face to face, and in full glory, like the full moon, even more than the full moon, as we have learned, and we'll learn about Losad Love. So it could be panim b'panim. Imzah. So Zah and Malchus, which are, for lack of a better word, they are essentially code words. They're cryptic words. When you learn to understand them, they're essentially the epitome of Mashpia and Makabel. And that's why they play such a central role in Maimorim of Chassidus. When you learn Maimorim, you'll see Zah, Malchus, Zah, Yichud, Zah, Malchus, their relationship, how they affect each other, and so on. So in simple English, as they said, it's all this process that we're talking about. So he says that, let me see here. So I'm looking now at line 3, 6, 7, 8. So we stopped at the line that says, so now he explains, why does Malchus have this potential? Because Malchus doesn't come from nowhere. It's not like I said before, it starts like nothing. It's not bereft. It was just created that way. But this very child, that's just a nekudah, just like the one cell of a child, of a new life that's been conceived, it's only one cell. You don't see much in a cell. But that very cell has it within it the ability to split into 2 cells and 4 cells and 8 cells and becomes an entire human being with all the complexity of what life entails. So he says, why does Malchus have this potential to grow to that extent? Is because this nekudah is actually comes from Atzmos. Because that's the whole kavanah. He says here like this. Yeshleme kanal, the Yeshleme b'chinas atzmus al kain b'yacholti lamed ponim b'ponim in b'chinas zah. So this explains the Kabbalistic concept that he said before. Malchus netzola b'sheit shedish b'nekudah, and what nekudah is it? The nekudah of keser, not the nekudah of chachma or bina or the nekudah of chachma or the levels below chachma, because that's already giluyim. Keser is a helam. It's in the highest level, Shedish Sharshe is the Helam Atzmi, but it's a state of Helam. But so the Nekudah of Malchus has within it the Keser embedded within it, but he calls here, Bichol that Atzmus, Al Kain Bichol Telamed Ponim Ponim B'chinazah. So it's not just a student who happens to grow and he can become wiser and wiser as he expands his containers. He's able to appreciate and understand his teacher to the point he could even be equal to his teacher. There's something deeper here, that this student, this Nekudah, this Malchus, has within it, embedded within it, Kayach Atzmus. but it's going to need Aveda to obviously reveal and trigger this power for it to grow in that way. And that's where we stopped. So I'm going to continue summarizing from here. As I said, I'll select sections. Not going to read it all. If I think it's something that's going to digress or gets too dense, I'll skip it. And as I said before, I'm not skipping it because we did learn these memoirs already. For those that were not here, this was all learned. We learned in detail and in depth, and it's all available online at ayinbeis.com. You can find all the previous classes, as well as on our YouTube playlist, Ayin Beis. So if you want if you want more information on any particular idea, you can simply go there. As I said before, I'm structuring this in a unique way in order to fulfill what we want to accomplish here. So he says now like this. V'zehu gamkein, said the line begins Atzmus, the page is 1358. If you want to follow the text, you can at ayinbeis.com. If you don't have the Sefer, the book, just the PDFs, the pages have been scanned at ayinbeis.com. So we'll continue from the middle of the sentence, the middle of the line. V'zehu gamkein, she'inyan hamerchav u'b'chinas malchus dafke. So I just want to point out something I'm noticing here. The Rebbe Rashab, in the process, obviously, of the bigger theme, but what he does also, he's explaining a lot of, in a way, details of Kabbalistic concepts that on their own can become are difficult to understand. So far we talked about the Nekudah of Malchus, how it was Netzal b'seit Shedish as a Nekudah, Keser, how Zoh emanates in a very different way. And now he's bringing another point that we find that Malchus is associated with the concept of merchav. Let me explain what that means before we read it inside. You know, the expression is min hameitzer karosi ka posuk. We say it right before Tkir Shefer. From my distress, min hameitzer, from my dire straits, I call out to God, karosi ka, anoni b'merchav ka. And then God responds to me in expansiveness. So Meitzar and Merchav are the two ends of the spectrum. Meitzar is utter distress, utter, what's the word I want to use? Dire strait, an utter locked place, trapped place. A Meitzar, like Mitzrayim, very limited, constrained place. Merchav means expanded, expansive. So when a person goes out from Meitzar to Merchav, that's like Yitzias Mitzrayim. It's going out from a very narrow place into a very expansive place. So in Kabbalah and Chassidus, Meitzah and Merchav refer to these two states. Now we all experience it over any time in life. Whenever you are in a state of distress or crisis or setback, or where you feel really down, you feel things are not working, you feel trapped or at loss, that's a state of Meitzah. Merchav is when you feel freed. The issue is resolved. Whatever that issue may be. So in the bigger Ruchnistic sense of the word, Malchus, you would think, is a state of Meitzah. Why? Because it is only a Nekudah. Less Lemagamal Klum, it has nothing of its own. And indeed, we know where Golus takes place is in Malchus. Like you even mentioned earlier, if you remember the bottom of last page, that's why the 9 spheres are not part of Malchus proper. They're only an addition. So when there was the Golus, he says at the bottom, when there was the Churban, Beis Hamikdash, the Churban was in Malchus. So the words he used were, let's just find the exact expression where he said this. He said, the Tamachdeshi Istalku Beis Ached V'lo Yeh Ben B'gam. Didn't talk about the Churban, but B'gam. I mentioned the Churban, but it's the same idea. So when there's a Chet, it only affects Malchus. And the 10 spheres are removed from there. So you see, Malchus is subject. If there's going to be a Golus, it's going to affect Malchus more than anywhere else, because Malchus is the most vulnerable. That's where the Begam happens. The wound, the injury will happen. But on the other hand, he's saying here, you see Malchus also associated with Merchav. with expansiveness. So how do you explain that? So he's going to explain that with what we just learned. It's taka nekudah. And therefore, as being a nekudah doesn't have its own powerful light, it's very vulnerable, but that nekudah is rooted in etzem. And that's why Malchus has the capacity to grow into a full entity and stand face to face even with Zah. And we'll learn later even higher than that. Malchus elevates all the way to the highest levels. So he says, Zeu gam ken shina merchu b'chinas Malchus dafka, k'may shekosav, hachivi mokem elecha, u'k'may prozes teshuv Yerushalayim. Hachivi mokem elecha, hachivi from the word harchava, to expand, mokem elecha, the place of your tent, of your dwelling. Prozes teshuv Yerushalayim. With Yerushalayim, it says, la'osed lavei. The prozes means it will sit like the now, Yerushalayim is surrounded by walls to protect it. It's more of a if you want to call it, a sealed container. And prozes teshuv Yerushalayim, it says, Yerushalayim will then reside, prozes is the opposite of a walled city, an open city. Why? Because it'll go enter into a state of complete expansiveness. Where today, Yerushalayim needs to be protected. That's why it has walls from enemies and from both spiritually and physically. So, prozes teshuv Yerushalayim. Yeshlemer dezah hu b'chinas kav. Rebbe Rashab now adds, again, you see, weaving together the Kabbalistic, but also this is coming away we're coming away with this to also understand the whole bigger dynamic of the anatomy of Mashpia Makabel, that Zah, which is Mashpia b'chinas kav, and b'chinas eirech. So Zah is a kav. Why? Because it's like length. Like the Vav. That's why it's Vav. Vav is a line that consists of the letter the numbers 6, the 6 midis. It extends. So generally we speak Yud K Vav K. Yud is Chachma. Hey is Bina. Vav is Zah. And the final Hey is Malchus. Hey is expansive compared to a Vav. A Vav extends. A Vav is like a pipe, a channel. Well, Malchus is b'chinas shetach. And Malchus is a space. Basically, Nekudah, Kav, Shetach are the three. Nekudah is a point. If you're familiar with mathematics, a point, a line, and a plane. Plane as in, so a point is just a dot. A line is infinite amount of dots. And Shetach is a plane. It's an infinite amount of lines. So first thing you learn in geometry is Nekudah, Kav, Shetach. Point, line, plane. And the context in the spheres, it would be, Malchus would be the Shetach. A Shetach is more expansive than a line. A line, however, extends and is a revelation. And Malchus has the potential to become a Shetach. That the Malchus b'chinas Ein Sof. And in the future, the Malchus will be, the Shetach HaRechiv of Malchus, that space of Malchus will be in a level of Ein Sof. Today, it's obviously in a far more diminished state. Who? And what does this mean? That Atzmus, which is higher than all revelation altogether. That's the ultimate expansiveness in the form of Ein Sof Mamish. Let me explain what this means. I don't know if you've ever heard the expression Merchav Ha'atzmi. Merchav Ha'atzmi. So I mentioned before, Meitzar Merchav. One is a more constrained place, limited place. One is expanded. So you would think expansiveness is the domain of Zah, the Mashpia. The Makabel is just a Nekudah. A Nekudah doesn't have any expansiveness, it's just a dot. And Merchav belongs, the teacher is expanding by transmitting knowledge and what he's teaching. That's true in Giluyim. But there's another level. What is true Merchav? You say something is expansive, it could be expansive compared to revelation, in the level of revelation. So Malchus is a very diminished revelation, or less lemagama klum, it has nothing of its own. And Zah has everything. It's the mashpia, like the sun. Sun and the moon. The sun is the expansive one, the moon is the recipient. However, based on what we've learned, that the kavanas ha'atzmus is dafke Malchus, so Malchus is not just some weak, lowly entity. Yes, on a revealed level, Malchus is very vulnerable and as a Nekudah. but it's rooted in the etzem. The etzem is even deeper than all the Giluim. As much as Zah and the Mashpia and the sun is expansive, you can imagine the source of it all, God, who created the sun and created Zah and created the Mashpia, he has no limits altogether. Because at the end of the day, as much as Zah has expansiveness, it's still limited. It's still a creation. It's still an entity that has its parameters. Chesed, Gvura, Teferes, Netzach, Ched, Yesod, Yesod. These are all parameters. It's true. They're divine faculties. They're divine attributes. But they are very expressive. They're I should say, they have a very defined identities, each one in their own way. You want Merchava Atzmi? You need to go higher than Gilui altogether. Because Gilui, by definition, means a revelation. Yes, it could be a revelation of Ein Sof even, but it's still not the source. Real Merchava Atzmi, what he said, B'chinas Ein Sof Mamish, there you need the Merchav. That is only a level that's higher than Giluim altogether. So this is a theme we've learned about a number of times, but it always originally appears counterintuitive, because you would think something that doesn't have Gilui is the opposite of expansiveness, because we're so accustomed to Gilui being revealed. Like you see the sun, wow, awesome. The moon has its power, but you're not going to compare it to the firepower of the sun, because we value things by size, by intensity, by the things we measure. But one of the things Chassidus really is machadish is that the etzem of a person that is higher than Gilui is much more powerful than the Giluim of a person. This is one of the key things that Baal Shem Tov came to reveal, the etzem haneshama. Because if you don't go with that approach, then who is greater? You'll say the Talmid Chacham is always going to be greater than the person who knows less. Because you see, he has revealed knowledge, he's more pious. Comes the Baal Shem Tov says there's an etzem haneshama. Not that the Baal Shem Tov was machadish it. There's etzem haneshama from the beginning of when God first put the neshamas into existence. But he revealed it, he emphasized it. So when you see somebody and say, look, this Jew, like I mentioned, is an arava, doesn't have no Torah, he doesn't have mitzvahs, he doesn't have a scent or a taste. There's no Giluyim, whatever the reason is. But we say the etzem is there. And the etzem is stronger and deeper than all the Giluyim. Obviously, we don't want the etzem to remain locked and sealed and concealed. You want to reveal that. You want to fan that pilot flame. But never think it's not there. And it's there even with more, and it's more intense than anything beyond, because anything other, because it's coming from the source itself. So this is in simple English what he's saying here. He's speaking of he said this is more dense and very short, cryptic, Kabbalistic terms, but that's essentially what he's saying about Malchus. So Malchus carries etzem in it. Zah carries Gilui in it. Not that Zah is not powerful, but it's the Gilui of Elikus. And Malchus carries the etzem of Elikus, which is why he connected it to Helam Ha'atzmi. So in that Helam Ha'atzmi lies a lot more power and merchav than even the merchav Hagoli of revelation of Zah. Now again, this is not a competition where one wins over the other. We want both, and both are necessary. And remember, the same etzem created both. So Zah also has etzem in it. It's just not as the etzem, no pun intended, is not as revealed as it is in Malchus, where it's not revealed at all. Because etzem is not subject to revelation. This goes back to the central theme we've been talking about, that the more revealed it is, the more defined it is. And atzmus is not defined. So the truth is, you find much more etzem in concealment than you do, like his book, Yoshes Cheshach Sisrei, where the concealment is his place, much more than you find in Revelation. But Hashem wants both. He didn't just want a tachtenim, he wanted a dire b'tachtenim. And a home means that it's revealed that it's his home. So even though in Golus we have the etzem, but we want a Beis HaMikdash on this earth, the Beis HaMikdash and Yerushalayim, on the Har HaBayis, and Mashiach Begoli. It's not just about that it's there be'etzem. So this is just adding explanation to the main points he's making right here. Okay. Stop for any questions, if anybody wants to ask anything. I'm just looking. I think I'm going to skip a section here. Again, not because it's not relevant, God forbid, and the Rebbe Rashab wrote it, obviously, it's all part of it, because we've learned it in that context, and I want to focus more, as I said, on the bigger picture. So we already discussed that style. Again, if you want to learn more about the rest of what he says here, go back to the classes that are around 22 months ago. And I think Yitzchak was very kind to volunteer if anybody wants help finding them, and help you find it. It's not difficult to find. They're all titled, so it should be pretty easy to identify the link. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to copy. The next section, he just goes into more detail where Merchav resides, what levels it is, and specifically the level of Ak, I see. But then he says, this is all Shetach of Ak. Kolshkein, I'm skipping around 10 lines. B'chinas ha-merchav the atzmus b'chinas einsof mamish. U'k'mayanoni b'merchav ka, the pasuk I mentioned before. B'chinas merchav ha-atzmus. So there's merchav expansiveness, and of course that's all relative to what level you're at, and then there's merchav ha-atzmus. So the line, approximately a little more than halfway down the page. V'hu, mipnei ki min ha-meitza karasi. So what I summed up before in introducing this, he's now explaining. How do you get to that merchav, anoni ba merchav ka, of merchav atmos? That's ki mina meitza karasi, am chinas meitza sheba nefesh, shebechinas nekudas atzmi is the nefesh. It's the meitza in the nefesh, which is the, if you want to call it, the stress of the soul, or the constraint state of the soul, which is a nekuda atzmi is the nefesh. It's a nekuda atzmi. It's only a concentrated point. So it could have a very negative manifestation when a person feels really trapped, really constrained, really limited. But you should know that within that lies the anani b'merchav ka, v'hu inyan hatshuva. And I'll explain, this is the level of tshuva. Now you may recall this is connected, remember the reaching the helam ha'atzmi, it was through distress. Ein oid was that the helam itself, that our distress hitting rock bottom, as we were using that expression a lot then, is catapults you to a place you would never reach on your own, when everything is comfortable, so to speak. So it's dafka the distress that gets a person, when a person is desperate and there's nowhere to run and knows they must make a move, you see things happen. So no, sometimes that means when you hit rock bottom, that's what happens. So he says, what is it in Aveda? When hatshuva shemetech primis nekudas halev b'chinas hazozes atzmuse hanikrat psychos halev. Yeah, this goes back. I have to find the page. We spoke about this in Ein Oid, and I'm sure it's connected. I have to develop it a little more. But bottom line is, so what's the tshuva? Not just stam tshuva. You know, you could do tshuva, you do something wrong and you regret, you ask forgiveness, and you repair. From here on, you won't do it again. But there's sometimes a tshuva that comes from a very dark, dark place. You really fell into a terrible place. Story with Rabbi Eliezer ben Derdaya. Says in the Gemara that there was no sin on earth that he did not transgress in his lifetime. And then it came to a point where he realized the end of his life. I don't know if it's the end of his life or that's what caused the end of his life, but bottom line is, came to a point of absolute recognizing how far he fallen. So it says he bent down and cried out, "Sark." And konei lomi b'shachas, with such a deep cry that could only come from such desperation, that with that he earned his right to the world to come. B'shachas. Shah means 1 hour, but Shah also means with one twist, with one turn, one shift. Shah from the word Shah, twist, shift. I'm not saying he means that dafka this tshuva here, but that's the language that's used. So it's coming from Pnimius and Nekudas Halev, from the inner Nekuda, from the level, because it's not expansive. Rabbi Eliezer ben Derdaya or other people on that level, it's not like they suddenly sat down and started learning Torah and davening and a lot of Aveda. It came from the exact opposite. They were completely crushed. And that in turn triggered the Nekudah Halev, Primis Nekudah Halev, Bechinas Hazozes Atzmusei. That's a very powerful expression. Hazozes means a shake from your very core. When it says you're shaken to the core, not just shaken. Someone's shaken to the core. That's how deep of an effect this has. Hanikrat Tzaikas Halev, and that's called the cry of the heart. A real cry of the heart. Like it says elsewhere, such a cry that comes from the darkest point, from the ultimate mina meitzer, anani b'marchav reaches the merchav, the pnimis and atzmos of Ein Sof itself. So he continues the Rebbe Rashab and says the yesh leimer shezeyin hameitzer lamayla. So he's adding some explanation. Because Meitzah usually we identify with negative things, distress, dire straits, constraints, and so on. So he says, no, there's a Meitzah Lamaila too. Because remember, Lamaila, it's higher than Gilui. Meitzah can mean Meitzah in a negative way, that you have nothing. But Meitzah can also mean you're above everything. So therefore, you don't need anything. So he says, a Meitzah Lamaila, the Hainu B'chinas Ha'atzmus Lamaila Meged Gilui Legamri. This is, again, one of the most powerful concepts in Chassidus that people don't realize, and it's so central actually to healing. I share this very often with therapists and people in the world of psychology. So people have come to it through intuition and experience that sometimes you hit rock bottom and it brings you some type of revelation you would never have gotten in a regular comfort zone. But when you understand it from a Chassidic point of view, it's much deeper than that. Remember, there's only one God. The fact that you have hit such rock bottom, so yes, it's very dark, but the fact is that in a way is touching the etzem that's higher than all Giluyim. It's similar with Alter Rebbe writes in Lekutei Torah and Bamidbar. Bamidbar is an arid desert. Bamidbar Sinai, the 40 years that the Jews traveled through the wilderness. It's a wilderness. Noch is sort of an akriv, filled with serpents and scorpions and all types of dangerous creatures, and it's arid, no water. And it says, the Pasuk says, I think Yecheskel, Asher lo yoshev adam sham. It's not a place of civilization. A normal person can't live there. Simply not conducive to a civilized world. You see real serious deserts are that way. And says the Alter Rebbe, lo yoshev adam sham, is on the negative side, it's lower than civilization. But that's rooted in the Midbar Lamaila, the Loi Oshav Yodam Adam Elyon. Because Adam Elyon is a structured Adam. So Loi Oshav Adam Elyon, it's the Eberster who's called Lamaila Adam, Loi Adam who's beyond the image or likeness of man. So it's the darkest that's rooted in the deepest. And that's why it's so dark, because the deepest levels is beyond revelation. Now, this doesn't justify the darkness. This is not saying, you know what, stay in the dark because you're touching the etzem. You touch the etzem when the darkness elicits your cry, like we're learning here, of tshuva, and then the root of it, where such darkness came from, is from the etzem itself. Primis v'atzmus ein sof. Which is, it's l'mayla atzmus sh'laman mikidr geder gili legamri. And that's the meaning. From my distress, I call out. He's emphasizing the word karosi. That from the core, etzem, which is not in any way expressed, you're calling out. There's a kriya v'amshacha now. There's a call. It's like a baby crying out. And a kriya is a hamshacha, is a drawing down or a transmission. Umesham hamshacha daunani b'merchav, and from dafke that cry and that call, so what does it draw down? That from anani b'merchav, response from the expansive place, chinas merchav atzmus mamish, the expansiveness of atzmus mamish. Ve'inyan hamerchav u'shalamaylu m'chinas hagbola b'keli, and this merchav is higher than any confinement of a container. You reach now the Eiris and Kalim, there's the Eir that is tailored and fits to the Keli. The Keli commensurate to the Eir. But here we're talking about reaching a place that's beyond Keli. But now comes the question the other way around. If you're reaching such a deep place, Malchus, so what happens with all the Giluim? What happens with Zoh? What happens with the structure of existence? Remember, the kavanah is diru b'tachtenim, not just to reach the etzem, but to make sure that the etzem is also integrated into all our levels and structures. So it's true, if a person lives their life and they are living a certain, I don't say comfort zone, but they're living a good life and they're following Torah and mitzvahs. So it's true that a person who reaches the rock bottom, falls rock bottom, is going to be able to touch a deeper level than anyone. But that's not the kavanah, that everyone should hit rock bottom. The kavanah is to live a healthy life in the first place, or even if a person does tshuva, you don't want to just live in the world of etzem. You want to get back on the track and build a high life and so on. It's not like, okay, once you hit rock bottom, you reach the etzem and the rest of your life, what happens to it? So he explains now, Omnom, this merchav ha'atzmos that we're talking about, b'chinas merchav ha'atzmos yashlemer, shezeu shegam agbolas hakeli yeh b'chinas ein sof. Not enough that you just basically defied and transcended all parameters. That's true. But he says it's also the Hagbolas HaKeli, which remember God also created, will be in a state of Ein Sof. So in other words, when it says Prozdes Teshu Yerushalayim, like we just learned, that Yerushalayim's walls will no longer be there, so the Pasuk also continues, what will be the walls? It says there will be walls of a fire. Hashem's fire will become the walls. So the question is asked, well, if there's no walls, what do you need walls for? Because the goal is not that there should be complete bli gvul, that the bli gvul should transform the gvul, that also the parameters and the kalim and the walls shouldn't be walls of stone, they should be divine walls, but you want the structure too. So ultimately the goal is fusing structure and beyond structure, which takes us back to the interface. If the interface is just to get to Atzmos, then the big question is, what about us? What about my identity? What about my personality? Fine, Rebbe Rashab ben Dadai, beautiful. He reached those deepest levels. But can it be integrated into his life? Or no, his life was just destroyed by his sins. So now he's reached the etzem. The answer is no, the etzem comes down into the Agbolas HaKeli, Yibchinas Ein Sof, Ukamoi B'Teira, Shibchinas Tam V'Seichel. And you see he's bringing Teira. Remember, Teira Eir is the Gilui from above, a Gilui of Ein Sof. Not like when it's from the bottom up. And yet, the Teira comes down into Tam V'Seichel. It's not just a Teira from Atzmos. There's reason, there's intelligence in Teira. We learn it, we understand it. Shezeh b'chinas Agbola. U'koneda d'chol b'chinas Seichel v'asaga b'hechach u'b'chinas Agbola. The very mere fact that you're understanding something means it has parameters. There's a logic to it. Shabbos is not Yom Tov. The logic of Moed b'miktzas, that if you acknowledge something, you're chayiv shvuah. I mean, there's a whole structural system of Torah logic. U'makol mokim, and at the same time, nevertheless, arucha me'eretz midah v'rechava min hayam. The same time we say Torah is as long as the earth itself, and rechava, the word rechava, and expansive as the expanse of the ocean. He doesn't mention ocean here. It's not the second half, but the word rechava. V'hainu shekol inyan minyani ateiru b'chinas hamerchav debli gvul mamash. So even though every inyan in its parameters at the same time manifests the merchav ha'atzmi of bli gvul mamash, the merchav, the expansiveness of something that is beyond. It's like basically bli gvul packaged into gvul, the infinite within the finite. The Eina Kavanah says that Rebbe Rashab, the intention here is not al ribui haprotim, not that there's infinite amount of details in every idea in Torah. Shebechol inyan. That's not what we're talking about. Ela shekol inyan proti hu b'chinas hamerchav ba'atzmei b'chinas bli gvul. But every detail, in that very detail, there's a certain power of the infinite. So it's not just, we're not talking about quantity here. There's a lot of infinite details. We're talking about a qualitative infinity within the finite. U'kamoishin is barley il, like we learned earlier, be'inyan hamadida the Torah, and this takes us back actually to the mimer of the Mittler Rebbe where he spoke about this, if you recall. Mokama arn enamin amida. Remember, nitfas and not nitfas. So he said about the medida Torah, she bli mida, that the measure of Torah is a measure without measure. U'kamei mokama arn, like the space of the arn. It occupied space, but the space was not occupied, like we said. Mokama arn enamin amida. U'kamei hamedida the man. And we learned this earlier about the man. The man on one hand came down in a measure, Emil Gergelis, a certain amount of man, but the man actually was not measurable. Even though it had measure, it was not measurable. Because it was lechem min hashamayim. It was essentially a combination of bli gvul and gvul. The nimtza. So what do we derive from this? What do we take away? The b'chinas ha'atzmus ulamayla meged the Gilui. Atzmus is higher than revelation. Umesham dafke b'chinas hamerche b'chinas ein sof mamish. And that's where from there you have expansive, that a utterly infinite expansiveness. Mamish. U'kamoi keinu b'chinas Malchus. And now we take from Malchus, originates from there. Shu b'chinas Nekudah be'etzem. Remember, Malchus is not solo, b'seid Nekudah. So Nekudah be'etzem. Anything that will extend or expand from Malchus is not its core essence. The b'chinas Helem, in the state of concealment, because it's rooted in Atzma Ein Sof. That's why it's in Nekudah. So it's not a Nekudah due to it's lacking something. It's a Nekudah due to the fact that it's expressing the deepest levels that are higher than revelation. But that's not the kavanah. The kavanah is now that etzem should be revealed. Well, the osid is gala b'malchus b'chinas shosha mekeda ha'atzmi, and malchus and l'osid rather, when malchus, the root of and source of malchus, will be revealed in it, then tiyeh b'chinas merchav b'yeser. Then malchus will be in an increased state of expansiveness, b'chinas ein sof mamish. U'kamoisha malchus b'chinas helem. The chol nekudah b'chinas helem. I'm just trying to think how it flows. I guess he's saying it'll be a combination of both. And that very expansiveness will also be within the very Malchus, which is in a state of Helem, because every Nekudah is in a form of Helem. Like the Zeir, like he said before, the Zeir al Zeh, so that's a level of Shcheir Ani V'nova, Shcheir Ani, canal. That on one hand it's dark, on the other hand it's beautiful because it has all this within it. So I'm not sure if he's saying L'Osed Love will be also a state of Helem, or he's saying that now it's in a state of Helem and then it will all come out in the most revealed way. Either way, it's the content is pretty clear. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Anybody? Let's stop for questions. This is a very obviously fundamental piece in general in the whole process of interface. But you see here the need for it's really like three things: Atzmus, Giluyim, Helem Lamata, which in turn, through our Aveda, we reveal the Etzem and then the Gilui within that very Helem and the Nekudah of Malchus. That's in a nutshell the three steps of the Tachlis HaBriya, why we're here. Okay. Everybody's been very quiet today. No comments, no thoughts, nothing. Okay. At least say we missed each other for this past most of the week. I did meet one of our loyal colleagues. Meira was very nice. She came to welcome me when I landed in Dallas Monday morning. So thank you, Meira. And we spoke a little while. I don't know if she's here. I think so.
You're
And
more than well.
yeah. So I can bring you warm regards. I was in San Antonio Sunday night, in Dallas Monday night, in Plano, Dallas. That Plano is a suburb of Dallas. And then Tuesday night in Rockville, Maryland. Thank God all went well. Brought some Chassidus to these places and bringed, and it was good. Nice turnouts. And today I'm off to Fresno, California later this afternoon.
Wow.
And then I'll be back Sunday night. So there won't be a class tomorrow and also not on Sunday. Monday, we'll have a class. Tuesday, I go to Cleveland. So one night, and then Wednesday, I'm back. And that should be it for a while. Let's give you the sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it sounds like you have to clone yourself. So you can be everywhere at once.
We're working with an AI engineer for that purpose.
Seriously? That's amazing.
Now, let's not take it that far. I don't want to clone myself entirely. I still want to feel needed.
Of course. No, we want the real thing. So, but that's wonderful.
He just showed us something. It's unbelievable. Because I have so much content, they literally, AI can take content and create a whole class like this with me speaking and nothing I've ever said before. It just distills ideas into a new topic. And you don't know that it's me, meaning you don't know it's not me naturally. And it's in Chinese, in Russian, in any language, and it's not lip sync. You can't even tell that the lips are different because it's so perfectly aligned. I promise you, I just saw it.
We're going to a new frontier. It's a new frontier.
I mean, it's also dangerous because if somebody wants to put something in my mouth that I never said,
Absolutely,
or I never would say, that could also be done,
Yeah.
But it's no, I'm not. The truth is, I'm not marveling at it because to me, it's a natural growth of technology. But the fact is, from a point of view of spreading Chassidus, it can propel the work exponentially beyond.
Amazing. It should only be.
I have hundreds of questions people ask me all the time, and you put it in now, and once you train the agent, it's called, the agent will take everything you ever said and creates it. Now, obviously, you can edit it and review it, so it's not just a loose, not like a loose cannon out there, but that can save who knows how much time. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, just as an aside, but it's not going to replace Ayin Beis and so on. AI has not mastered Ayin Beis yet.
How about
and neither have I, for that matter.
How about the words come from the heart, reach the heart? Where would be that with an intelligent, artificial intelligence?
Unfortunately, you could train to do that too.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm not saying it's going to be perfect like a mother to a child or to someone, but it can be trained to fake it, Listen, I haven't tested it yet. Like, I want to see, as a philosophical piece, and then say to the AI, please add a very emotional, vulnerable thing and cry while you're doing it. Let's see what would happen. What do you think? I know it's a little cynical. What should I tell you?
Well, we're just going to have to stretch more.
No, we'll have a disclaimer and say this is coming from machine generated tears. I'll do one for Tisha B'Av that way. We'll do an AI generated tearful eulogy to the Beis Hamikdash. Let's see what happens. What do you think, Robin? You want to write an article about it?
I think it's phenomenal. I mean, it's like anything else. It's like atomic energy, right? It could be used for good, and it could also be used for the opposite. But I think, in terms of reaching, well, let's just think about it.
Well, look, maybe the fact that the media today is so messed up is revealing to us the responsibility. The good players are going to be the ones that know how to use a higher level of morality when they use these machines.
Absolutely.
And that morality is going to have to dictate what's out there, because they're going to be really bad players. People are going to use it for terrible things, misinformation. I mean, imagine countries who want to plant. They can plant any idea, and you won't even be able to trace that it's false.
It's happening already, unfortunately. But I wonder, like people say to me, do you think it's going to replace you, as a journalist? And I just don't. I mean, the emotional part, like the connection part, I just wonder about it. Like, can it?
Well, one thing for sure, it's not going to replace your neurosis. I don't mean yours. I mean all. You know what I mean? All of them.
That'll be the acid test, right?
Yeah. Look, I do have to run because I have a flight a little later, and I must record a few programs beforehand. But I love speaking to everybody. It's been, been great reconnecting, and I will we'll be in touch. So let me just stop the recording. I never did that. We're at the bottom of page, what did I do? 1358? That it?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're at the bottom of 1358. I want to make sure.
End of the paragraph.
Yeah, right at the end of the paragraph. Good. Let me stop it.